Hi, everyone. And welcome to today's live chat. This is the third live chat in the 2022 series about the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships Program, or Sdpf for short. I'm glad you are joining us today for today's chat. So my name is Cynthia Bernardes. I'm a program manager here for Sdpf. I will be your moderator for today's chat. The live chat series is designed for you. Anyone who is considering how this fellowship can be a part of your career path. This series is an opportunity for you to learn about Sdpf and the fellowship experience directly from current fellows and alumni. Do we have our slides? I'm assuming we have our slides. Okay, well, I am just going to keep going. So, to put today's session into context, we are hosting one chat each month during the application season, June through October. We hope you will join us for that We hope that you will join us if that sounds interesting to you. So each month's chat will focus on a unique aspect of the fellowship experience, meant to answer common questions from applicants, and each chat will feature a different panel of fellows. So Sdpf is currently accepting applications. Someone who applies by November 1st of this year will be considered for a position in the 2023-2024 fellowship class. And so I'm hoping that you all will plan to apply. So I'm curious, do you plan to apply? In a moment, you'll see a pop-up on your screen. Click the response that best matches with your plan. All right, well, fantastic. Yes, 2022. All right, this is awesome. Well, thank you for being here. For those of you who are applying or thinking about applying this year, we're so glad again that you're here. This session will help you understand day-to-day life as a fellow and help you select your 2 program areas. For those of you who may be a few years away from applying, that's great that you're here. Also, as you'll hear from our panelists, there may be ways to plug into the science policy community. And for those who aren't sure, we're thankful you're sharing your time with us to learn more about Sdpf. And so since many of you are planning to apply now or in the future, I'd like to share a brief overview of Sdpf. So these fellowships are an opportunity for doctoral level scientists, social scientists, and engineers to spend a year contributing their expertise to federal policy. They are a paid 1-year full-time commitment in Washington, D.C. So if you're wondering if you're eligible to apply, interested in an application overview, visit our application portal and we'll put a link in the chat box now. And for our next question, relates to your discipline. So please click the discipline that best describes you. This will help us understand who is joining us today. Oh, that's awesome. All right. Biological health sciences, medical sciences, welcome. So like the fellows, you are representing many backgrounds from biological and physical sciences to social sciences and computer sciences and engineering. This diversity of discipline is important. The federal agencies and offices that host fellows are looking for a wide range of backgrounds and skills. Okay, and finally, our third question relates to your policy interests. Please click which Sdpf program area you're excited to learn about more today. All right, executive and legislative. All right, well, thank you for telling us about your interests. In a moment, you'll hear from Melody, Connor, and Rashmina, who will tell you about life as an executive, legislative, and judicial branch fellow. So, today's chat topic is so important because Sdpf applicants can apply to 2 of the 3 program areas. It's an important decision for applicants to make. You'll leave today's chat with a better understanding of each program area and a better sense of how each program area might align with your policy interests. Please ask questions. Please ask questions. And if you like, you can indicate the person or people to whom your question is directed. So speaking of questions, to submit your question to the panel, click the question box in your menu as shown on the screen. We'll get to as many questions as we can today. All right, so now I am happy to introduce you to our fellows. So first up, we have Melody Tan. She is the Health and Environment Legislative Assistant for Congressman Donald E. Chin. She previously worked on health policy for Senator Tina Smith as a 2021-2022 IEEE USA Congressional Science and Engineering Fellow. Melody was a 2019 Marzion Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. And she earned her PhD in bioengineering from Rice University. Welcome, Melody. Next, we have Connor Dacey. He recently started a new position at FEMA, which is the emergency He recently started a new position as an emergency management specialist in response with FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. After concluding his time as an Sdpf fellow at the U.S. Geological Survey, prior to being a fellow, Connor spent a year as a 2020-2021 Science Policy Fellow at the Geological Society of America. He received a PhD in disaster science and management from the University of Delaware. So glad to have you join us, Connor. And lastly, we have Rashmina William. She's a water resources engineer, passionate about using data and science as a multidisciplinary tool to empower communities to sustainability shape their environments. In her role as an Sdpf Judicial Fellow, she leverages her expertise to develop educational tools for the federal judiciary relating to the science of water and the environment. Starting next month, she will be switching branches and serving as an executive branch fellow in the Department of Energy. She earned her PhD in civil engineering from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So thank you for being here, Rashmina. All right, so before I go to questions from the audience, I'll kick it off with one. And so, why did you all decide to apply to the branch that you're serving in, or that you did serve in? What drew you to applying to that branch or that program area? And how did you prepare for that application? So I'm gonna have Connor respond first, followed by Melody, followed by Rashmina. And Rashmina, I'm actually going to add a little tidbit or add to the question, since now you're also applying to the executive branch fellowship. Can you, in your response, speak to both? So what interests you in applying to the judicial fellowship, and then what interests you in applying to the executive branch? So Connor, all yours.
Okay, perfect. And just confirming you can hear me all right? All is good?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so welcome everyone. I wish this could be done in person. I could see everyone's face, but I'm really glad to be here to talk to you all today. So what got me into this fellowship? So as was just said by Cynthia, before this fellowship actually was in another fellowship with the Geological Society of America, and was really interested in science policy, generally speaking. And that fellowship really allowed me to get more the legislative side of how science can impact policy. As she said, my background is in meteorology and emergency management. So I was really interested on topics like climate change, on hurricane preparedness, on natural hazards, mitigation, et cetera. And so that fellowship really introduced me to the legislative side, but I was still had interest in really learning more about the executive side. So agencies such as NOAA, USGS, which is where I completed my fellowship, FEMA, and other executive agencies, and really wanted to see how the implementation of policy how it worked. Actually be with the executives that kind of use the policy that I have experience with and learned about in my prior fellowship and actually applied it kind of in the real world. So that was really my motivation of wanting to really see how what I've already learned could be applied. And I always knew I wanted to go into public service. Joining the federal government has kind of been a goal of mine since my PhD years. So just kind of, trying to grasp all the different aspects of the federal government. It was a big push for me to apply for this fellowship. And I wanted something new. I wanted to do something new. I wanted new experiences. So the fact that this fellowship allowed me to apply to multiple different executive agencies, all the way from, State Department, all the way through NOAA, USGS, FEMA, EPA, it just allowed a lot more doors to open. And so I really enjoyed in the thoughts, and it excited me of being able to apply to a fellowship program that gave a really wide breadth of potential doors that opened and different experiences. So that's really what kind of got me interested in the fellowship, learning about the fellowship, and then eventually obviously applied to the fellowship and was grateful enough and privileged enough and lucky enough to get into to become a finalist. So yeah, I think that was majority of your question. Did I miss any aspect of it?
No, that was good. That was good. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hi all. So for me, my journey into policy really started after the 2016 election. It became really important to me to not just be a good scientist, but also to get involved in the broader community. And so I had never been involved in politics before that point, but I just on literally social media found a campaign event and just went and just started volunteering for campaigns, knocking on doors, phone banking, doing the sweaty and glamorous work of just reaching out to voters, and really got hooked in that process. Just gained so much from being able to get in the community and meet people from very different backgrounds from my own, and really understand how people out in the community talk about various issues, which is obviously very different than you talk about them in academia or even on the Hill in DC. So all throughout my PhD, I stayed engaged in politics and just volunteered on campaigns. And as I was wrapping up, knew I wanted to come on the Hill and work in Congress. And so getting a fellowship is kind of your way to get your foot in the door and getting hired in Congress. In the years leading up to finally wrapping up my PhD and being able to apply for the AAAS fellowship, I really worked on being engaged to the maximum of my ability locally. And that's something I really encourage everyone to do. You don't necessarily have to have formal policy experience to be a strong applicant, but I think just getting out in your community, volunteering, mentoring, doing outreach can be so enriching both to you and also like helps you understand community needs and what's important and strengthens your application. I think also one thing that helped me going through the application process was it was really clear that this is something I'd wanted to do for years, and I had really already been invested in my community and done the sweaty block walking. And this wasn't just me looking for another line on my resume, but I was already really deeply invested in the future of this country. And I love Congress specifically because you get so much interpersonal engagement with community members. My life right now is constant meetings, constituents, stakeholders, figuring out how to move issues forward in the context of my boss's priorities. And I really love taking in all that input from the broader community and figuring out how to move forward with it.
Yeah, thanks to Connor and Melody for essentially stating everything I was about to state. I love the fact that Melody brought up the boots on the ground, like getting that community interface, because that was what brought me to policy as well, although through a very indirect route. I'm what you might call a very reluctant engineer. When I came to undergrad, I didn't know that I wanted to go into engineering in the first place because I couldn't figure out how to bring my math brain and science skills to actually helping people. But I was fortunate enough to get involved with a group called Engineers Without Borders, working in a water restoration project out in Cameroon. And that really brought that insight that I was missing, like that you can use engineering and science to really connect with people and help people around the world. My graduate work was in green infrastructure. And for anyone who is a civil engineer out there, I know there aren't many engineers on the call, but working as a civil engineer, it's all about people. Infrastructure touches everything that we interface with in our communities. And so it was very important for me as an engineer to understand those community needs, but also to understand the infrastructure from a political sense and how that impacts the designs that we make as engineers. And there were a couple of court cases that went through when I was in graduate school through the Supreme Court and through the Illinois Supreme Court that had ripple down effects on my research. And I got really interested in how these judges were ruling on these cases and like the impacts that they could have on the science. So I started actually taking law classes as part of my PhD program. And I just really enjoyed doing that. I took a summer off to go and study at Vermont Law School to audit some classes, integrated that into my work. And then one of my law professors, actually, who was on my PhD committee, recommended that I apply to the Judicial Fellowship, not just to the executive branch, which is why I was planning to apply for it. Like I said, I think it was like Connor who said this, like I kind of like took a swing at it. I didn't expect to get it at all because I had the preconceived notion that you needed to have a JD or additional work experience to apply for the Judicial Fellowship. You don't. And I happened to get it that year, and I am so thrilled and so excited that I have had this experience. It's been absolutely wonderful. The reason I decided to reapply and apply for the executive branch is the judicial branch is very much an interpretive branch of government. So we're not a policy-making branch of government. We look at the science that's out there, and judges look at the science and the evidence that's been placed in previous cases and use that precedent rule of law to make the findings and the deliberations that you need to make a fair judgment. But as staff working in the judicial branch, you cannot make policy recommendations because it would appear to be politically biased. So it was really, what I really want to get out of next year was to be able to apply some of that scientific experience to actually making some policies rather than just interpreting them. So, Cynthia, I hope that answers all of your questions.
No, that definitely did. And all three of you have unique experiences and they're so interesting. And it's just, you guys just went on a whim, like, okay, I'm interested in this and I'm just gonna apply and see what happens. So that's awesome. That's awesome. All right, audience members, the floor is yours to ask our panelists questions. So I will be keeping an eye out on the chat. And so this time, I'm interested, well, in all of you, can you describe sort of, once you delved into your offices or delved into your fellowship, what was one thing that was uphill climb for you to sort of get adjusted to your new life? What was the aha moment, like, oh my goodness, I am here in this office or in this space?
Yeah, so I could start if Connor and Melody are okay with that, because like I mentioned, the judicial branch is very much an interpretive branch, and I'm a very outspoken person. So it took me a very, very long time to tailor my writing to the needs of the branch. So what does a judge want in terms of this information? I can't just spill the entire textbook onto a web page and think that they're going to read it. That's not how this works. What are the precedent cases that I need to be citing? What are the previous policies that judges have ruled on that I need to look at? But also tailoring that language so that it wasn't a value judgment on anything, which for me was incredibly difficult. I think my aha moment was actually getting to sit in front of a camera and record like a webinar series for the judicial branch, which is going to get posted next year along with the web content that I've written. The fact that I got to create a web series on a Supreme Court case that has implications for the lower court, all of the lower courts that have to rule on environmental law, And that's helping judges better understand the science of hydrology and why the case was ruled the way it was, I think is really, really cool.
I can go next, and I also wanted to add on something Rashmina said about just being outspoken as a person. That's actually something I considered, and the reason I really love Congress, because you do have political opinions in Congress. You are a political entity. You work for a member who is a member of a political party. So you really have the ability to choose to work for someone who your political views align with. And it is an inherently political role where you can speak out on that in a way you can't in some other branches. So thinking more about just kind of what surprised me on the Hill, I think it's just the sheer volume of meetings. Back in academia, meetings are at least an hour. Here, meetings are 15 to 30 minutes max, often back to back to back. I cover the healthcare portfolio, and so that's a portfolio known for a very high volume of meetings. Every disease you could think of has at least one advocacy group, if not a dozen. And so they all do a really good job of reaching out to member offices and asking for meetings. So I've gotten used to just taking a high volume of those meetings, which can often be pretty emotionally draining. You're hearing a lot of really sad stories about people's experiences with various diseases, and you're trying to do the best you can moving forward for them. But often you do feel like you can't do enough, and that's something that you do have to come to terms with, that you can't fix every problem in the world. And I think just moving the needle a little bit is something that you should be able to be proud of.
Yeah, and I can go next. Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Cynthia.
No, I was going to, there was a question directed to Melody, and while she was still in the role of, sharing her congressional experience, I wanted her to respond briefly to the question, and then Connor, we can hear about your experience. So Melody, an audience member writes, I'm excited about working in Congress, but nervous about the hours or the pace. How did you find adjusting the pace and creating a healthy balance while working in Congress? And you were sort of touching on that a little bit, so would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. So the way the congressional matching process works is you're first accepted as a fellow by usually a professional society that partners with AAAS or AAAS itself, but you don't match to an office in the initial round of applications. So after you're accepted as a fellow in September, after orientation, you go through a matching process where you interview with a number of offices who are interested in hosting fellows. And it really should be a two-way match process where they're a good fit for what you're looking for and you're what they're looking for. So one of my priorities when I went through the match process was finding an office with a healthy work culture. And I was able to do that with the, Senator Tina Smith's office. And I knew that they had hosted a number of AAAS and other fellowship fellows in the past, and they had all said great things about the work-life balance. It is long hours, and there are a lot of meetings. It is definitely hard work. I don't want to minimize that, but I do think if you go into the matching process looking for healthy work environments, you can find offices that value you as a person, not just as an extra pair of hands, and also support you through your professional development outside of the work you do for that office.
Thank you, Melody. Connor.
Yeah, so on the executive side, so I would definitely say as an executive fellow is more, at least in terms of the political context, more like how Rashmina described it, where we are nonpartisan as being part of executive fellows with the different agencies. But one thing that was really cool about being an executive fellow, as Melody described the interview process and the way it kind of works, it's a similar way with the executive branch where you submit your application. Once you become a finalist, you can you kind of get matched in a way, kind of like med school a little bit, where you get matched with different offices that span multiple different agencies. So I had 12 interviews, I believe, in 1 week with agencies going anywhere from State Department, EPA, NOAA, FEMA, some random offices that I honestly had never heard of before. I remember one was on economics, even though that's not my background, but they were still interested in having a conversation with me. Department of Energy, DOE. So one thing that was really interesting about being on the executive branch is you have a lot of opportunity and a lot of potential depending on what your interests are. And even if you're not 100% sure where you want to go, you usually have enough interviews where you can kind of feel out the office culture, as Melody talked about, the priorities of the agency, and you can really kind of be yourself and you can really talk about what interests you. And I know for me, as a meteorologist, interested in natural hazards and disaster mitigation and preparedness, I really wanted a position that would allow me to grow in that field. And honestly, USGS wasn't initially one of those that I thought had an emergency management department until I had my interview with them. And I learned that they actually do, which makes sense. I mean, they're dealing with, hazards such as volcanoes, earthquakes, and the list goes on. So you really learn a lot, which is kind of a really surprising thing to me of being an executive fellow, of how much you learn about yourself and how much you learn about the different agencies and what's out there. So that was really interesting. And one surprising thing that I learned personally in my fellowship experience is I was working with the Landslide hazards program. But again, I'm a meteorologist. I don't know much about geologic hazards such as landslides, but I chose them. And my aha moment was really thinking at first, am I qualified to be here? But then realizing that actually a lot of the skills I gained in my PhD program and as an academic really did transfer over into my position as a AAAS fellow, whether it was reading and interpreting different laws or writing. Writing skills were huge in my fellowship, or meeting different people, again, doing maybe 15, 20-minute meetings, getting the point out real quick, and then going back and doing some of the writing or the different tasks that I had to do as part of my responsibilities. So really just kind of understanding and putting confidence back in yourself, but you do have the skills as a PhD, even if they're not directly applicable, you think at first, you'll learn over time that actually you can do a lot of different things just with the skills you gained while you were in school. So I think that was a really aha moment for me, a really interesting moment, and something that I really appreciated and worked on throughout my entire fellowship experience.
Yeah, and Cynthia, if I can say one more thing, because it relates to something that Connor said and Melody, like both of you said, when you're a judicial fellow or a congressional fellow, and to some extent executive fellow, don't feel boxed in by your subject area from your PhD. I'm the only judicial fellow from AAAS, which means I'm the only scientist in my office. And that means that my portfolio of responsibilities covers not just hydrological science, it covers everything from toxicology to epidemiology, anything that touches the environment. Oh, and climate science as well. I got to do a little bit of that too. Anything that touches environmental science and the law was part of my portfolio to some extent. And that was a little scary for me, to be honest, because I am not a biomed person. I don't know anything about disease. But you, as a scientist, you have the skills to pick up on that content pretty quickly, much more quickly than you think you'll be able to. So don't be afraid to, take the plunge and apply to something that you think, I am absolutely not qualified for X. They picked you because they saw something in your resume that they thought was valuable to them, and it's worth going in and exploring those opportunities because of that.
I'm glad you all are talking about this. It sort of reminds me of imposter syndrome, just, not feeling as if you belong there. And so you all sort of touched a little bit about how you all were able to sort of navigate, I guess, on the general view, how you all were able to navigate it. But were you able to, or can you all speak to another time where you felt like you did not belong, and how did you then overcome that, in the sense of you being a scientist, or the only scientist, as Rashmina mentioned, in her office? Like, how did you all handle I guess your imposter syndrome?
I can go ahead and start. So I think the first thing to remember is that you know how to learn, and that's the most important thing. I think that's the most transferable experience or skill from your PhD. you know how to learn, you know how to tackle a problem that you know nothing about, and you know how to figure it out. And then I think another part of that is also just having a lot of humility and being able to ask questions, whether that's of your mentor, your colleagues, other offices. On the Hill, we reach out a lot to the Congressional Research Service, which is amazing and has saved me on many instances when I had to deal with issues that I did not have background on. So you really, the skill that Hill offices hire for and look for is, do you know how to find the answer? Because our portfolios are so broad. Right now, as a legislative assistant, I cover all of healthcare and all of the environment. And there's no conceivable way anyone can know everything about everything in those portfolios. So it's a matter of having some instincts around like the parameters and the context and the frameworks you're working in, and then knowing who to reach out to. We also talk a ton to community stakeholders who are experts in these issues and do have extensive knowledge gathered over years and decades. So really, I see my role as interfacing between experts rather than myself being an expert.
Yeah, I absolutely would like echo everything that Melody just said. I would like to emphasize like that building out that knowledge network is absolutely essential for any of these fields, I think, but especially congressional and judicial again, because part of my work wasn't being a content generator. That wasn't my job. It was finding the experts in all of these fields and bringing them together to create that content. So building out your network through your academic contacts, through attending conferences, through talking to your old colleagues from grad school for recommendations, through talking to your AAAS network for recommendations is incredibly important and is a skill that I've definitely been working on developing over the past year.
Yeah, and I would just add, I mean, one of the biggest things that I thought that I had to deal with to overcome kind of this feeling of not belonging. Again, I was at a geological agency. We kind of had a running joke in my group that I look up, everyone else looks down. I like clouds, everyone else likes rocks. I was kind of like the running joke of the group. So I went right in thinking that I didn't know much about landslides, that I did not know enough about geology to be able to work. But like Melody talked about, it was really a lot about bringing other people together. So it was a lot of communication skills. One of the things that really helped me was kind of being a sponge and just listening. Listening is, I can't stress enough how important it is to kind of listen to people around you. And that really made me feel better, because there were times where I could chime in and give my, opinion as a scientist if we were talking about hazards or something. And, people listen. And the same thing I would say I got from listening to other people is I could hear their expertise and kind of grow. So you learn, you can pick up the skills. We're fast learners. We're meant to be here. We went through the hard part, which was getting the PhD. And so we can just transfer a lot of those skills, and at least in my experience, they very much appreciate it. It's not necessarily that people are like, oh, you have a PhD in this specific field. It's, oh, you have all of these skills because you have a PhD. So it's really skill-based, and I think that's really what allowed me to feel more confident about the work I was doing. Again, I did a lot of writing, so just having an academic background and knowing how to do the research, how to write, how to bring people together, how to find out what, project management, and those are kind of things that we gather as PhD students. Because I did feel, I would explain it and say, as a PhD candidate or student, we were a lot. We were our own authors, we were researchers, we were sometimes our own statisticians, we did our own scheduling, so we were like our own secretaries, we were our own data managers. We kind of did everything as one person. And one thing in an executive agency that I've learned is like, there are other people around that can help you out. So you don't have to do everything. But because we did initially in school have to do so much, we gained a lot of the skills so we can understand, like, oh, you're doing research, this person does research, but I can understand, or I can help you if you need help, or I can reach out to this person because I did that in my PhD. So it's really about the skills and the experiences you use, which is why, again, if you don't be afraid to apply for a specific position or agency, even if it's not right in your background, because you can learn it. You have the skills to learn. It's just about listening and utilizing those skills over time, and you'll grow. And the people around you should support you. And I felt very blessed with the people around me that really kind of supported me and made it a great experience. So people, I would say.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. Let's talk about the application process, or how do you become a competitive applicant? So one audience member writes, what do people typically do in that gap period between finishing their PhD or where they are, and then the next application cycle, to make themselves a more competitive applicant for Sdpf? And I would also add, there was one person who has an environmental background and or environmental sciences background. And so what would sort of be some nuggets that will make this applicant, the environmental sciences applicant, or whoever applicant, um, make them competitive? So share your thoughts.
I can take a first stab at this. I'm a little unusual in that I had a mandatory gap period because I was not a US citizen when I graduated from my PhD program. So it took me a while to get citizenship before I could apply for the next cycle. So I went off and did 2 years of private consulting work as a practicing civil engineer. And I think that it built so many practical skills in terms of project management, time management, and learning about the nuts and bolts of what a civil engineer actually does that you don't get taught as an academic. I think all of those things made my application to both the judicial branch and the executive branch 100 times stronger. So if you have a chance to go out and like do an applied year in the field, highly encourage that. It was very useful. In terms of stuff I did during grad school to make myself more competitive as an applicant, I mentioned some of the law classes that I took. So if you have a chance to take classes or take a summer and do something else outside your discipline, it will make your application look a lot stronger. So in my case, that was law. It could be volunteer with a community organization. It could be taking classes in something like environmental justice, if that's a topic that you're interested in. It could be volunteering with an organization at your university. So I was part of the science policy group at U of I. Just find something that sparks your interest and allows the folks who are going to be reading your application to show them that you have the drive to better understand these communities and better understand the policies that shape your field. I think that's probably the strongest piece of advice I can give.
Yeah, I think for the congressional fellowship, it's helpful to understand that the application requirements aren't necessarily the same as for the other branches. So most of the congressional fellows, 27 of the 29 in my cohort, including myself, were selected by partner scientific societies. So I was the IEEE congressional fellow. And so they don't have the PhD requirement in order to apply. So I defended at the end of June 2021, and I started my fellowship in September 2021. So I had a really small gap that I basically just like postdoc for a month in my previous lab. But for others who have a bigger gap, I was also an alum of the Mirzayan Fellowship at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And I did that halfway through my PhD, but a lot of my fellow fellows from that program did that as kind of a bridge between wrapping up their PhDs or postdocs and transitioning to the AAAS fellowship. So that's an opportunity I definitely recommend. That's 12 weeks at the National Academies in DC, and it does have a stipend to help with that.
Yeah, and I would say, so my path is a little unique in the fact that I knew at the end of my PhD that I did not want to go into academia or research. That just never really was the field that I wanted to go into. I knew I really wanted to go into some type of agency or do public service. So I know throughout a lot of programs, a lot of the recommendations are for PhDs to go right into a postdoc after. And I went through all 4 years of my PhD saying, I'm not going postdoc. I just don't want to do it. So I knew that I didn't want to do that despite the recommendation by many, and decided to do a 1-year policy fellowship. I was interested in, it was an election year. I graduated in 2020. I really wanted to kind of see how science impacted policy. So I did a 1-year policy fellowship. And that was really interesting for me. And I think that helped make my application unique because I was really true to what I wanted to do. And that's one thing that I would advise everyone to do. So another example of that would be in grad school. So I don't have as many published papers as a lot of my peers because rather than spending summers publishing, which is recommended a lot of times in the academic bubble, I decided to do an emergency management internship with local fire department for 2 consecutive summers, trying to build those skills, because that is what was interesting to me, even though I knew on the academic side it was publish, publish, publish. I didn't want to do that. I kind of stayed true to really what interests me. And I think that that is advice that I would issue to all of you is like, if you have a passion for something, like go for it and realize that there's a lot more outside of academia. I know as academics, we can be put into the bubble a lot of the time, but you can be true to your own interests. And then when you speak about it, because I actually, in my interview, I was asked how come I don't have as many publications as maybe other people around have been. But I was just very upfront and honest with them and explain, you know, this is my interest. This is where I want to go. This is directly applicable to these agencies in the executive branch. I thought that these opportunities were more beneficial for my career path. And lo and behold, I ended up getting the fellowship. So I think just being true to what you want to do, doing what you want to do between graduation and applying, perhaps doing something that is interesting to you, would go way farther than just doing a postdoc or doing something that you don't enjoy just because you think it might help you on your application. I think being unique and true to your own interests is really what will help you in the interview process and in the application as a whole.
Thank you. This question is for Melody. Are you the only scientist in the legislative office? For everyone, how much work is collaborative versus solo?
So currently in my office, I work in the House for Congressman McEachin. I am the only scientist in my office. But when I was a fellow with the Smith office, there was another AAAS fellow in the same office. She covered environment and energy, and I worked on healthcare. I think a lot is very collaborative on the Hill because you're constantly interfacing with stakeholders, other offices, your caucus, the committee staff. So I think the part that's individual is you are going between all these different actors and you're asking questions and sharing information and gathering information, but I'm constantly engaging with other people. I also do want to note just that because I have a scientific background, my role is not different than other legislative assistants or other fellows when I was a fellow in the Smith office. I think the way to think about it when you're on the Hill is you have a different background and you have some different experiences and skills that you bring in, but your role is fundamentally the same as everyone else. So we're not doing data analysis. Don't try to be a congressional fellow if that's what you have your heart set on. We don't really do our own analysis. We reach out to experts and academic experts and national academies, think tanks for that analysis. So my role really is that interpersonal interface between all those experts.
I can go next. I took charge of like 4 different projects during my year as a fellow. And of those 4 projects, I would say 3 of them were very highly collaborative. And funnily enough, one of them, we mentioned skills and transferable skills and not being put in a box by yourself because of what you can do. Don't let your office put you in a box either. If you are an engineer, hypothetically, who knows how to code really well and does a lot of data analysis, and you end up in an office with a bunch of social scientists who deal with a lot of data on a regular basis, let them know that you know how to do data analysis because they will give you stuff to do. So I actually got to work on an absolutely enormous text mining database for the judicial branch. I think it was something like 100,000 entries of e-voucher data that they were trying to parse. So I got to build up my skills in R, work on text mining information, and develop a little miniature report that's going to be integrated into their report for the Judicial Conference as part of their work on public defender works under the 4th Amendment and seeing how judges interface with that system. So I would say that collaboration is an important part of being a judicial fellow. I will also say that the way the office is structured, because you're the only scientist, one of the reasons they hire you is they give you a pet project for the entire year. So you get to take ownership of this section of their website and just write content for it. So because I was a hydrologist and we were in the middle of a Supreme Court year that had a lot of hydrology cases come through, um, that's why I got hired to write. So that was my own personal individual project that I got to write on my own. But it had a lot of pieces where I got to work with folks who are in multimedia, or if I wanted to do video production, or bringing in those experts to do those videos in the first place. So be aware that if you apply for the Judicial Fellowship, you will be spending a lot of your time working on that little box project, but there's room to spread your wings outside of that as well.
Yeah, and I guess I could just comment real quick and say, there's so many federal agencies as part of the AAAS program that you really can choose if you want to be around scientists all day and researchers. That's a definite possibility. I mean, I was with USGS, which is a premier science agency, so I was often surrounded by others with PhDs. As a fellow myself, that wasn't my specific role. Like Melody said, the scientists that were there hired to do the science and the research, that's what they did. As a fellow, I didn't have one specific project other than having helped write a strategic plan for landslide disasters, which was really exciting and really enjoyable experience. But I also got to do a bunch of other things. So I could be in the emergency management group, and I got to learn from them, and I got to join other types of groups throughout the agency. So it just really depends on what your interests are. If you're really set on wanting to do the research, wanting still to be a scientist, that there is an option on the executive side, depending on the agency. But again, I would just encourage everyone to kind of get that breadth of knowledge and kind of push yourself outside of your comfort zone and try to see what's out there and see, again, how your skills are transferable between different positions.
Thank you. I want to stay within this area here. Okay, so this question is for Connor, and I think you touched on it. Let's see. During the matching process with various agencies, were there areas outside of your personal interests that are important to keep in mind during the interviews?
So, I mean, like I said, things to just keep in mind when you're going through it. So again, I had interviews with some agencies that I had one about economics, and I'm not an economist, and I haven't taken a lot of classes in school. But because the economy, the way they were really looking at was how climate change impacts the economy and how it might impact you going forward. And it's, having the climate knowledge and being a meteorologist, I had some of those skills and that knowledge base. So I think just being transparent about what you know and what you don't know in the interview is really helpful. Again, it's really at that point, once you're at the interview, it's very, in my opinion, it's less stress. You've gone through the hard part of the whole process. It's more conversational. And the biggest thing I would say, and that helped me when I was going through all my different interviews, is again, people over position. I will scream that and spit into infinity and beyond. I just think that the colleagues and the people that you work with are really going to be those your best asset and the best thing to push you into the career that you want to go, even if the position isn't exactly ideal and what you may or may not want to do. And that's really what brought me into USGS. I had some of the best colleagues around me, one of the best bosses I've ever worked with, just really encouraging people, warm, welcoming working environment. And that's kind of what I was trying to grasp in the interviews when I was going through them all, is less about necessarily the agency, less about maybe the exact position, but really was trying to gauge the work culture, the people that I was going to be working with, and if I could find those mentors and those supervisors that are really going to help progress me in my career. And so I would just say, go in transparent, be true to yourself, and kind of try to seek out the people that you think are going to help you.
Thank you. I'm going to combine this question. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And how important do you think your participation in the AAAS Sdpf Fellowship was in helping you get there? I'm combining this, okay? And also speak to And besides staying in public service, what other opportunities do fellows pursue after the fellowship? So it's one is, where do you see yourself, future, how does the fellowship help you navigate that? And then on the other side is with you or even with other fellows, what other opportunities do they pursue following the fellowship?
Cynthia, do you want me to go first? Because my fellowship has been, well, I should say the judicial branch fellowship has been a little unusual because I think I'm the first judicial fellow who's decided to go into the executive branch. All of the others have either gone to academia or into private practice. I mean, there's only been 4 of us, so we're a very mixed bag. But I know a lot of my friends in the executive branch work in the federal government, they work in NGOs, they work with business sector. You'll hear this many, many times, but we are legion. I think there's like 4,000 alumni now, and it feels like sometimes they're all concentrated in Washington, D.C. I feel like every conversation I have, especially with the Department of Energy folks, there's always someone who's like, oh yeah, my boss was a AAAS fellow, or this person I'm mentoring is currently a AAAS fellow, or I'm a AAAS fellow. It's absolutely delightful. So I hope that answers the second part of that question. In terms of where I see myself in 5 years, I was very upfront with my office interviews that I want to go into federal service. That's my end goal after this fellowship. So I see myself working with the US EPA or Department of Energy, helping to push that infrastructure bill forward, honestly, and build our cities and build our water infrastructure as resilient as we can for the challenges of climate change and for a much larger urban population.
So for me, I think I really love the legislative branch, whether that's on the federal or the state level. There's something just so special to me about engaging with communities and then actually moving those policy priorities forward. So I hope I'll be able to stay on the Hill as a staffer probably for the next several years. Might consider exploring other roles. So currently I work in a personal office. There's also committee staff positions that might be of interest. And then I think in the longer term, I'd be interested in moving back to my home state of Texas, even potentially running for office myself. And I do think having experience working in Congress is so valuable. I think it's really difficult, unfortunately, to understand the legislative process until you're on the inside. And there's a lot I know now that I wish I knew even a couple of years ago as I was a graduate student doing advocacy days, advocating for medical research funding and cancer research. I think after a congressional fellowship, you really do have a ton of opportunities because it is so valuable to understand just how Congress works, how you take in constituent and stakeholder input, how you move proposals forward, and just all the levers and like mechanisms you can do that. So I looked at executive agency positions, think tanks, nonprofits would also be a really good option. A lot of fellows do go into the executive branch after the congressional fellowship, and that experience is really valuable because unfortunately, I don't think there's always as much transparency as you would want between the executive branch and Congress. And so I think having both of those experiences can be really valuable to future employers. And for myself, I really do like the legislative branch, so I hope to stay in this space in the future.
Yeah, for me, I think I had a little bit of a unique experience because I actually ended my fellowship early after the first year. So the way the fellowship works is if you stay in your fellowship position for at least 10 months, you leave the fellowship in good standing, which means that you can still become an alumni of the program. You can get the benefits, the networking, all of that. But what happened with me is that I was told from other fellows, first year, once you get a few months in, to apply for other positions, especially in the executive branch, if that's what you want to go into. And it was really supported by my bosses in my fellowship program. And then because I was a fellow with an executive agency already, I actually was offered a full-time position with FEMA, which is where I'm at now. And that was really a dream agency for me from the beginning. That's where I really wanted to go with my career. So the fellowship really was extremely beneficial for my career development because it actually helped me get a real job by the end of it, which I think is, we could all probably agree, is kind of the main point. And the goal at the end of this is for us all to get those type of jobs, our dream jobs one day. And this fellowship program has been instrumental for helping me obtain that position. And like, for example, one little tidbit that I learned as an executive fellow is some agencies, when they hire you on, they'll hire you on in different ways. Sometimes you're a Schedule A hire, sometimes you're not. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you'll learn throughout the whole process the different ways that you can be hired as an executive fellow. But being able to understand when the type of hiring process you're in can really influence and help you later on. So I was a Schedule A hire. I got what's called an SF50 form, which is kind of like a golden ticket that looks really good in your portfolio when you're trying to get into different agencies with the government. So again, the fellowship program kind of just gave me all these little things throughout my experience that really allowed me to obtain a full-time federal position at the agency that I've been trying to get into now and wanted to get into for a number of years. So I cannot thank the fellowship program enough. It is a great experience. And if you have any questions about how to navigate that process, I'd be happy to help. But in 5 years from now, hopefully I am still with FEMA. That is the goal. Now that I'm here, I've been here only about a month, actually a month to this day, I've been with FEMA. So I'm really excited to be here. And again, I'm very proud to be part of this fellowship, alumni of this alumnus fellowship. So.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
We are approaching the end of our session, and wow, times really did move fast. And I love your experiences. I love the fact that you all took the time out to share your experiences today. So really quickly, maybe about a minute each. What are you most proud of accomplishing during your time as a fellow? What are you most proud of accomplishing during your time as a fellow? So I'll go Rashmina, Melody, Connor.
Thanks for putting me on the spot. I think what I'm most proud of accomplishing is helping to shepherd a climate science chapter into the reference manual for scientific evidence for the judiciary. It's a giant fat tome. It's 1,500 pages, but this book ends up on the desk of every judicial clerk in the federal government. It's basically their primer on how-to science for everything from like how to use, like how drugs work to now how climate science works. We never had a climate science chapter, and now as part of the federal judicial branch, I've helped to create that chapter as part of this reference manual. So I am so proud and excited that this is probably going to be moving forward to the next year.
Congratulations. Oh my goodness. Go ahead, Melody.
Also, just wanted to quickly add to my previous response. The fellowship is really helpful because in Congress, they don't like to hire people until you've had prior congressional experience. So the way to get around that catch-22 is through a fellowship where you're paid externally. The other way to do that is to start working when you're 22 in an unpaid or underpaid internship, unfortunately. But what I am proud of, I was really lucky to be able to lead drafting a bill on integrated behavioral health care, which I think is so important. And it's exciting to see bipartisan support for mental health in Congress. And then also just adapting to the environment. The Hill is a very unique place. It works probably the polar opposite of academia. So just learning how the Hill works, doing good work on the Hill, and also building a strong network and community that helped me get a job permanently after the fellowship.
I would say my most proud accomplishment is helping to take the lead on our strategy for landslide loss. So really trying to take a law that was passed by both chambers at the end of 2019 and eventually was signed into law in early 2020 about reducing landslide hazards, losses, and keeping people safe from landslides, and helping to actually put that law into writing and operationalize the law was really exciting, and something that I'm excited to see it published hopefully any day now it'll be up and ready. So that was a really exciting, and then just building that network. And I would say a lot of the coworkers that I was at, that I made, worked with and collaborated with at USGS are now, I can say, some of my close friends, and I'm just really happy to build that network. And that was something that again, people, something I'm very proud of.
Awesome. Oh my goodness. Thank you so, so, so much for sharing your experiences today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You all are inspiring, really. Thank you, thank you, thank you. To the audience member, thank you so much for taking the time out to listen to our panelists today. So in the upcoming days, we'll send you a recording of this chat and resources to support your Sdpf application. We hope you can join us on September 15th for the next chat in our series, which is called Sdpf Application and Interview, Advice and Walkthrough. And if I couldn't get into your question today, please email us at fellowships@AAAS.org or reply to any of our live chat emails. Please enjoy your day. Thanks again. Thank you, thank you, thank you to our panelists. Have a wonderful day.